I'm 94 years old, and there's something I never imagined I would say out loud after a lifetime of marriage. For 40 years, my husband lived two lives. While I believed we were building a life together, he was already living another life somewhere else. We married young. We built a simple home, created routines, collected photographs, birthdays, quiet Sundays. To me, that was what a lifetime beside someone meant. I believed I knew the man I had slept beside for decades. But there's something about time that no one tells you. Sometimes you can live 40 years next to someone and still not know the truth. I only discovered everything after I had already lived almost an entire lifetime beside him. And when the truth finally appeared, it changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and about the things we choose not to see. Stay with me, because what I discovered after 40 years still keeps me awake at night. When I look back now, it's strange to realize how completely normal our life seemed. We were the kind of couple the neighbors had known for years. We had our routines, our quiet habits, small traditions that slowly formed over time. He would leave early for work, I would take care of the house, and later came the years when we shared the everyday worries just like any other couple trying to build something together. He was never a very expressive man, but he was never distant either. He was polite, responsible, the kind of person who didn't raise suspicion. He always paid the bills on time, remembered important dates, and fixed things around the house when they broke. If you looked from the outside, you would simply see an ordinary man living an ordinary life beside his wife. And maybe that was exactly what made me trust him so deeply. Life didn't seem to have room for big secrets. The years passed quietly, almost predictably. We grew old together within the same routine, sharing meals, simple conversations, and that comfortable silence that only exists when two people have lived together for a very long time. But there is something curious about trust. When you truly believe in someone, you stop asking certain questions. Small details stop seeming important. Small absences begin to have simple explanations, and anything that could raise a doubt is quickly pushed to the corner of your mind. Today I understand that for many years I wasn't just living a life beside him. I was also believing in a story that felt too complete to question. And it was precisely that quiet certainty that prevented me from noticing something that, looking back now, may never have been as hidden as I once believed. Over time, small things began to appear that, at the time, seemed insignificant. Nothing big enough to cause a scandal in my mind, nothing that clearly looked wrong. They were just details, small events that appeared and disappeared within our routine, as if they were simply a natural part of the life of any couple that had been together for many years. Sometimes he needed to travel for a few days because of work. That never seemed strange to me, because his job had always come with unexpected demands. Other times he would arrive home later than usual, saying he had to take care of something on the way or help a colleague. I was never the kind of person who interrogated or asked too many questions, and maybe that's why those explanations always seemed enough at the time. There were also moments when he seemed distant, as if his mind was somewhere else. It wasn't exactly coldness, but a different kind of silence. When I asked if everything was all right, he would always say yes, that it was just tiredness, work worries, or normal things from adult life. And I believed him, because for decades he had always been the kind of man who seemed to carry his concerns quietly on his own. Today, looking back, I realized there were signs scattered across many years. Small delays, repeated absences, stories that sometimes didn't quite fit together. But at the time, I never connected those things. When you live inside a stable routine for a long time, your mind learns to protect what feels safe. Maybe the truth had already been passing right in front of my eyes during many of those moments. But there is something curious about the human heart. When you love someone for a long time, you don't look for proof that your life might be a lie. You simply keep living, believing that everything is exactly where it should be. And it was precisely that quiet trust that made me ignore something that, years later, would become impossible to ignore. I was 82 years old when everything began to fall apart. Until that moment, I believed I already knew almost everything about the life I had lived. After so many decades of marriage, you start to think there are no longer any surprises big enough to change the entire story. But it was precisely during that quiet stage of old age that something unexpected knocked on my door. That afternoon, I was home alone when the phone rang. It seemed like an ordinary call, apparently nothing important. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice asked for my husband. I assumed it was someone from work or perhaps someone trying to sort out something old. But there was something in the way she spoke that confused me, as if she was absolutely certain he would be there with me at that moment. I explained that he wasn't home, and then there was a strange silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the kind of silence you hear when someone dials the wrong number. It was a heavy silence, as if that woman was trying to decide whether she should continue the conversation or simply hang up. Before I could ask anything, she said something that still echoes in my memory to this day. She said his name and then mentioned an address I had never heard before. In that instant, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't exactly fear, but a kind of uneasiness I couldn't explain. After I hung up the phone, I sat there in silence, trying to understand why that moment had bothered me so much. It was just a strange phone call, nothing more than that. But that day, for the first time in many years, something inside me began to question a story I had always accepted as the truth. At first, I tried to convince myself that the phone call meant nothing. People get confused, numbers are dialed incorrectly, stories cross paths without explanation. For days, I repeated this in my head, trying to preserve the calm that had always existed inside our home. But that strange feeling didn't disappear. On the contrary, the more I tried to ignore it, the more that quiet question kept returning. A few days later, I did something I had never done in our entire life together. I started looking for answers. It wasn't an impulsive act, nor an explosion of suspicion. It was more like a quiet need to understand what had happened during that call. I wanted to prove to myself that it was simply a misunderstanding. That was when the address came back to my mind. The name of the street wasn't familiar, but it was still engraved in my memory. A place that wasn't part of our routine, our story, or anywhere I knew he usually went. For years, I had never had a reason to investigate anything about my own husband. But when I finally discovered what existed at that address, something inside me simply stopped. There wasn't just a house there. There was an entire life. A woman who knew his name as well as I did. A house where he was also expected. Photographs, routines, birthdays, memories built over decades. And in that moment, I realized something that seemed impossible to accept. For 40 years, my husband didn't have just one family. He had two. After the truth appeared in front of me, the first thing I felt was not anger. It was silence. A deep, heavy silence, the kind that takes over your mind when it is still trying to understand what has just happened. For days, I walked through the house looking at the same furniture, the same photographs, the same walls, and everything felt different. The question that would not leave my mind was not only how he managed to do that for so many years. The question that truly tormented me was another one. How did I never notice? 40 years is far too long for a lie to survive on its own. A lie that big needs space. It needs moments when no one asks questions. It needs a calm routine where certain absences start to feel normal. And that was when I began to understand something painful about myself. For decades, I trusted that man completely. I trusted him so absolutely that I never felt the need to look more closely at certain things. When he said he needed to travel, I believed him. When he came home later than usual, I accepted the explanation. When he seemed distant, I assumed it was just exhaustion. Today, I realize that the truth may never have been completely hidden. Maybe it was scattered in small signs throughout all those years. But there is one thing time teaches in a cruel way. When we love someone deeply, sometimes we choose to believe the version of reality that allows us to keep living in peace. And it was exactly that peace that cost me 40 years of my life. After the initial shock passed, I began to realize that there was an even bigger question hidden inside that entire story. It wasn't just about him, about the choices he made, or about the double life he managed to maintain for so many years. The hardest question was understanding what that truth said about me and about the life I had lived beside him. For a long time, I wondered if our entire marriage had been a lie. I looked at the old photographs, the memories we had kept, the moments I believed had been real. It was painful to imagine that 40 years of my life might have been nothing more than an illusion built on a story I never truly knew. But as the months passed, something began to change inside me. I realized that although the truth was harsh, it also revealed something important about the way we live our relationship. Many times we believe that love means trusting without questioning, accepting everything in the name of peace, and keeping things running without creating conflict. But sometimes that quiet tranquility becomes the very place where the truth can hide for a very long time. Today, at 94 years old, I understand that trusting someone does not mean closing your eyes to everything. Love is not the absence of questions, and living together should not mean silence when something feels out of place. Small signs almost always appear along the way, but we only learn to recognize them after we have spent far too much time ignoring what once seemed too small to matter. It was a hard lesson, perhaps the hardest of my entire life. But it was also the only way for me to finally understand what it truly means to look at your own story with honesty. Today I am 94 years old, and when I look back at everything I've lived through, I realize that the hardest part of this story was not discovering the lie. The hardest part was accepting how long a truth can remain hidden when two people spend years living inside the same routine, believing they fully know one another. For 40 years, I shared a life with a man who, at the very same time, was quietly building another one. And although it still hurts when I think about it, it also taught me something I wish I had understood much earlier. Life rarely hides the signs completely. Most of the time, the signs appear slowly, in small details that seem far too easy to ignore. If there is one thing I would want you to take from this story, it is this: don't live on autopilot inside your relationships. Loving someone does not mean you stop observing, stop talking, or stop paying attention to things that feel out of place. Sometimes the questions we avoid asking today become the answers we discover far too late. And if this story made you reflect on your own life, Share it with someone who might also need to hear it. Sometimes a story told at the right moment can prevent decades of silence.